I've been watching this campaign play out, and there's been sources of inspiration in a variety of candidates. But as we go into Michigan's election on Tuesday, I am going to be voting for Joe Biden.
That was Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer endorsing former Vice President Joe Biden Thursday morning. Michigan is the biggest prize of next Tuesday's primaries, with 125 delegates up for grabs. Biden previously endorsed Whitmer for governor in 2018. Going forward, she will be the Biden campaign's fourth co-chair. She'll also serve as the top advisor and surrogate. Joining me now is Jonathan Oosting. He is a Michigan politics reporter for Bridge Magazine. Thanks so much for being with us, Jonathan. Senator Sanders won Michigan over Hillary Clinton in the 2016 primary. Why did Governor Whitmer choose to endorse Biden instead?
Well, she waited a long time to do so. She initially was planning to sit out the primary, but I think once it winnowed down to a much narrower field, she felt it was time to jump in here. Certainly, what she talked about today in endorsing the vice president is she thinks he can appeal to voters who she won over in 2018 by focusing on, as she calls it, kitchen table issues. Governor Whitmer ran here in Michigan on plans to, for instance, fix the roads, something that isn't necessarily the most exciting topic, but impacts a lot of people and their pocketbooks. So she sees Joe Biden as a pragmatist who's going to focus on real and concrete solutions, and that's why she decided to jump in now.
Is it clear what kind of influence her endorsement will actually have on voters?
No, I think it's debatable how big of a deal endorsements are, but if there was one endorsement to get in Michigan, this was it. Governor Whitmer won Michigan in 2018 by nearly 10 percentage points over her Republican challenger. This is a state that Donald Trump had won just 2 years earlier, albeit by a more narrow margin. So this is a governor who has, essentially won back a state that's going to be a key battleground this fall. So I think certainly it's a notable endorsement and one that could give the vice president a little boost here heading into the primary.
Well, of course, in recent days, we've seen the Democratic field narrow significantly, affecting many voters who have already sent in their absentee ballots. What's the procedure in Michigan? Do voters get a do-over?
Yeah, they can. It's not the easiest process in the world, but voters here can essentially spoil the absentee ballots that they've already filed. So what they can do is either by mail through Saturday at about 2 p.m. Can request the clerk spoil their ballot, or they can go to the clerk in person through 4 p.m. on Monday, so just the day before the primary, and then they can choose to either get a new absentee ballot or decide to vote at the polls instead. So Michigan has actually a new absentee voter law in effect for the first time this year that allows no reason absentee ballot voting. So there's a lot more folks voting by absentee this year than ever have before. The numbers are almost double what they were last year. A lot of people have already sent in their ballots. But as of today, I believe the latest figures were something like 15,000 people had already asked to spoil ballots they sent in and
How
vote
many
again.
did you say, Jonathan?
I believe it was 15,000 as of midday today, which is Thursday. So I expect we're going to see some more of that over the weekend. Elizabeth Warren had a pretty significant presence here. She was on the ground early in Michigan and I think had a lot of backers here. So I think a lot of those folks are going to be spoiling their ballots in coming days to try and weigh in and pick one of the other candidates left in the race.
So we know that Senator Sanders narrowly beat Hillary Clinton in 2016 after barnstorming college campuses and dominating among young voters. But with many of the state's universities and colleges on spring break this week, how might that affect his support?
Well, that's going to be really interesting to see. As far as I understand, in some of the exit polls from Super Tuesday states, he hasn't, seen that huge enthusiasm gap with young voters that he saw here in 2016. Unlike 2016, he is not speaking at college campuses this week. As you mentioned, not all of them are in session, so might have been speaking to an empty campus anyways. He will be in Detroit on Friday and then in Grand Rapids on Monday. Those are the two biggest cities in the state. But he's not speaking directly to youth voters in the way he did in 2016, or doesn't have that opportunity anyways. Those youth voters are part of the reason he really outperformed polls here. A lot of the pollsters had under projected how many young voters would turn out, and when they did in droves, he really proved pundits and polls wrong 4 years ago. We'll see if it can happen again.
So Senator Sanders has been hitting Joe Biden hard, saying that his past record is going to hurt him in Rust Belt states like Michigan. Let's listen to Biden's response to that.
Now let's go to Michigan, Bernie, and see if that's true. I'm the guy that helped bail out the automobile industry. What'd you do, old buddy?
All right, so Jonathan, what exactly has Biden done for Michigan's automobile industry?
Well, it seems like ancient history, perhaps to the rest of the country, but here in Michigan, we're only a little more than a decade removed from near collapse of General Motors and Chrysler, two of the biggest auto companies in the state. Now, Biden, of course, didn't directly bail out the automakers, but he was, of course, the vice president in the Obama administration that did significantly expand an auto bailout. That bailout actually began under former President George W. Bush, but Obama accelerated it and put a lot more money into the industry. It ended up being a roughly $80 billion auto bailout. Those companies did roar back to life, and they are now profitable and seem to be on relatively stable footing. And in fact, both of them ended up paying back a significant portion of the taxpayer funds that were used to prop them up. So, Biden, Democrats essentially have been running on that Obama auto bailout here for several years. Biden is no different. He just has a more direct connection to that auto rescue.
And Jonathan, you've reported that climate change plans of the Democratic candidates would have major implications for Detroit automakers, suppliers, and workers. What are some of these consequences? Are they positive or negative?
Well, that remains to be seen. I mean, especially, Senator Sanders, he's talking about mandating all electric vehicles by the year 2030. That's less than a decade away now and would require huge amounts of spending. General Motors is currently retooling a Detroit facility to produce electric vehicles. That facility alone is going to cost $2.2 billion to retool to build electric vehicles. Michigan builds a lot of internal combustion engines. It's a powertrain state. It puts those internal combustion engines in cars it sells here and around the country. Senator Sanders is proposing a lot of spending to help the automakers get there, but 2030 is still a really big ask. Now, Vice President Biden also wants a goal of 2030. It's my understanding that's not a mandate, but his spending proposal is a little more modest. He wants to spend significant money to build a series of electric vehicle charging stations around the country, but he hasn't talked specifically about whether he'd actually pump money into the industry to help them make that transition themselves.
All right, Jonathan Oosting for us. Jonathan, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.